What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ron Eddings, and today we're going to be exploring the world of risk when it comes to risk, exposures, and how cybersecurity is always evolving right in front of our eyes. Here's what we got lined up today. We're going to be starting with a little bit of a headline of a recent massive breach that exposed critical enterprise systems worldwide. Then we're going to be bringing on our special guest for this episode, Chris Dale, who is the co-founder and chief hacking officer at River Security and also a SANS principal instructor. We're going to talk all about responsible disclosure. We're going to talk about penetration testing, continuous cyber hunting, and the human side of hacking. We're going to end this episode with a little bit of a reflection from yours truly. I'm going to talk about continuous vigilance. I asked Chris, what does that mean? And we're going to talk all about what that means from my perspective as well. All that and more. Run the intro.
Who says tech can't be human?
Let's start out with a little bit of news. Today, we have a story about a massive exposure of critical enterprise systems, a case that reminds us of how one breach can ripple through an entire organization and lead to a mesh of cybersecurity risks and issues. Today's article comes from Tech Radars and it's titled Over 266,000 F5 Big IP Instances Exposed to Remote Attacks Following Breach. Wow. So let's break this one down. F5 Big IP. It sounds like there's quite a few people that are using these instances. Over 266,000 have been exposed. Now, maybe there's even more that we haven't necessarily publicly disclosed or even seen quite yet. So here's what happened. Last week, Tech Radar, they reported that over 266,000 publicly accessible F5 Big IP devices are potentially exposed after threat actors stole part of F5 secure code and their vulnerability data. The company, they confirmed that this was a breach, and they confirmed that this was done by a nation state actor. I'm not sure how many of y'all watch documentaries and docuseries, but 60 Minutes and also PBS Frontline have been putting out a lot of content around how China is commonly attacking U.S. companies, whether they be infrastructure companies, whether they be energy companies. So there's a lot of activity that's happening where nation states are targeting U.S. citizens and companies. The F5 incident, it reminds us that even trusted systems can become exposure points. You can't look at a security control as being off limits because attackers, they love security controls. We used to think that our Active Directory would help us with everything, but it does, but it also exposes us to the biggest elements of risk. And that brings us to what we need to be focusing on are the fundamentals. I thought, what better person to talk about some of the fundamentals and offensive operations and someone that has been a pen tester, someone that's been a CISO, and that's someone that's also now helping organizations at scale as a chief hacking officer. Our special guest for this episode is Chris Dale. Chris, most importantly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, love to be here, man.
Yeah, glad to have you. And, you know, one of the things I picked up from you on the PICUS event was you're one of the best speakers that can go in live and pre-recorded. You know, for people that haven't done a pre-recorded session, I think those are the hardest because it has to feel live, but it also has to be pre-recorded, which you know that means that maybe you could start over. So you have a very difficult decision to make. Any stumble that you make when it comes to your words, either stop and, you know, now start to get in your mind or just keep powering through. And for you, your pre-recorded sessions at events that I've seen feel like live sessions. Like I'm like, this is happening in front of a captive audience.
And that's the thing, Ron, you know, like going on teaching in front of students, you can't go back and do a double take necessarily, and especially not on live national TV, you know, when there's some journalists poking and probing, you kind of like got to own up to whatever you're going to say is the right things you're going to say. And that can be challenging for sure.
Well, I know that you've done a lot in your career, and I thought it would be amiss for me not to ask you about your company, and also like what led to starting a company, especially with the role of chief hacking officer.
Right? I've always been a pen tester at heart. And I used to work at a previous company where I was head of cybersecurity, setting up pen testing and incident response capabilities. But I always felt there was something missing, especially in terms of the pen testing aspect. Like companies are paying us a lot of money for what? For us vulnerabilities, sure. But then I see, like, say for example, we're doing a pen test, right? You give me some application. I notice that there's all kinds of connections and links to other systems that I really want to hack on, but those are not in scope. So how do I tell my customers that, look, there's more to this scope that you might be led to believe? Well, that's called scope creep, my friend. And you're now making yourself actually not very popular by saying it was supposed to cost this, but now it's going to cost that. There's all of these challenges with pen testing that I found needed to be solved. I want to operate on the same premises as real criminals can do. And that's, oh, well, you're dreaming, Chris. Sure. But that's what I want to do. So how do we do it? And it started out with me convincing my customers, hey, you don't need a pen test, my friend, okay? I know you think you need a pen test, but what you really need is a very broad sense of, you need a sense of who you are from a hacker's perspective. And I came up with something called a digital footprint exercise, which you could say is a very broad pen test, but I decide where I want to poke and probe. You don't decide. And I will show you your attack surface, and I will show you kind of like where I would want to go in and invest my time as a hacker. And for many companies, that was good enough. That was actually a great starting point, and it was certified to be good enough as a pen test that they got compliance, and everybody seemed to be happy. Sorry, but then came the crushing realization of print to PDF of that report means that everything is now stale and old. And that's when we started up River Security to basically help continuous reconnaissance, continuous mapping of the digital footprint, and look at a target over time, not just point in time. And that's what we're doing right now.
So, what generally happens when you go into an organization? Do they actually know what they have?
To be honest, this is one of the biggest aspects and biggest problems, knowing yourself. Honestly, it's an age-old problem, isn't it? What you expose should be simple, but IT, as it's becoming more and more complex and more fast moving, it is not simple anymore if it has ever been simple. So I find that most companies don't actually know. They need help. And there are two approaches to this. What many companies would do would be to go in and interview the IT department and ask them to fill in spreadsheets of systems, etc. Or show me your CMDB, show me your asset inventory. Like, that's one approach to things. But TCP/IP doesn't lie. You can go ask the network and show me what you got. So if there's something on a network, it's bound to talk to me if I have the proper network segmentation in order, etc., or lack thereof. And we can go assess. That's what pen testers do. And that's what the blue team should also do, if you ask me. Basically go in and scan and discover. And the moment I say scan, people go like, oh my, that sounds dangerous. Nope, not necessarily dangerous, but it's a great way of discovering assets. Instead of talking to people, you talk to computer systems. Computer systems are not supposed to lie. And we can do a pretty good job in discovering attacks or attack surface.
What do you think is the most common misconception of our attack surface?
I think the most common misconception might be the depth of our systems. So a lot of misconceptions is that attack surface is all about networks, ASN numbers, domains, etc. But there's more to the equation than what meets the naked eye. Once I open up a computer system, for example, a domain hosting a web server on an IP address in the network, that application actually has a huge attack surface in terms of middleware, server capabilities like dynamic hosting of code. It might have libraries that can do all kinds of tricks, integrations to HubSpots, Google Analytics, who knows? And believe it or not, those things have attack surface too. So there's a lot of depth inside of an application that should give attackers clues on how to find risk and vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's, I think just opening up that door and looking inside of like, all right, what do I have? You'll always run into surprises, I would imagine, especially when you're doing your initial reconnaissance and assessment. After they've done an initial assessment, they realize that they don't know everything, and they come to grips with that. What is the first framework that people generally explore, investing in to like start to be a better manager at knowing oneself?
So the maturity that I've seen happening today, and I don't necessarily approve to this maturity model, is basically companies, they are currently investing in prevention, firewalls, EDRs, protective mechanisms, which they should, right? But then they ask themselves, are we there yet? Are we now soundproof, good to go, battle hardened? So they go in and contract the traditional pen tests or perhaps a digital footprint, etc. But then what has happened in our industry is that instead of looking towards even more proactive services like continuous pen testing and attack surface management, which I know you're an expert on, they look backwards into the more reactive space, and they start looking at how to invest in security operations centers, manage detection and response. Basically, they try to build up their response capabilities. We did actually get hacked. Now it's the time to like bring up your spear and pitchforks and kill the threat before it can cause damages. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a good idea. However, typically you can achieve more, and more importantly, proactive measures by looking towards, say, continuous pen testing and attack surface management rather than more reactive controls first, especially in terms of maturity and where we should be heading.
I think it's a great place to pivot to now talking about what goes on in a pen test or your service offering. What are the things that happen in that when you look at 2025?
So 2025 is hectic because of two primary things. The threat landscape changes from day to day. Gone is the time where you had like a CVE a month or whatever that became relevant. There's just so much movement right now in the common vulnerability exposures landscape. New proof of concepts, new vulnerabilities, new disclosures. There's something happening in the threat landscape all the time and every day. So that's massive. That causes us to have, as pen testers, new opportunities all the time also. Or at the very least, potential opportunities that could cause an impact across a wide or vast array of different assets. And the second thing I see is that, look, companies are also giving us new opportunities all the time. There's an IT department deploying, cool, but there's also third parties doing stuff on their behalf. And there's even employees going out there signing up for all kinds of third-party services and exposing brand, data, and more, not necessarily governed and controlled by the companies. And if we're going to be pen testers, I think we need to do a good job looking at these things too. I mean, that's what I would expect a company to hire me for, to be their, so to speak, criminal best friend, like their hacker best friend, looking at them, not just whatever tiny things they thought I should look at.
There was a term that I could have swore I heard you use called continuous vigilance. What is that?
The thing is, the world needs our help. We're blessed, Ron. We got skills and talents that we can put up for a good use. There are people who want and need us, and they don't necessarily know it. So when we go about looking for vulnerabilities across the people we know, our friends and family, our companies, and so on, sometimes we see other people who need help too. Like by accident, we might see that here's some open and misconfigured storage solutions in the cloud. We might by accident see that not only is our target vulnerable to several exploits, but other people are too vulnerable to exploits. So what should we then do? Just let them be them and just wait until some opportunistic hacker from a third world country appears, or just let them succumb to the potential hackers in the future, or should we let them know? I say we should let them know, of course, right?
Absolutely. It's your report card. It's the way that you're going to show your value, and hopefully it can be easily translated into words and language. I think that's actually the challenge for many people right now, whether it's breaking into cybersecurity and, passing that interview, giving specific examples as to, what impact your work had, not just the tools that you use. And I think same for the cybersecurity practitioner that's trying to gain more of a budget. They're going to need to be able to translate the fact that you do need me into something that I can understand as someone that's going to spend money. From your vantage point, you sell yourself, you sell your company. I think that's extremely powerful. I think cybersecurity practitioners can learn from how to be a better salesperson at what they do. What has been, one of those things that you've noticed that helps sell your value to especially non-technical audiences?
When I find a vulnerability, I sell it. I bring it to LinkedIn and show the world, hey, look at this. We could find something and turn it into a cool story. And selling yourself as a cybersecurity individual is not necessarily for many, it's something that is closed in and hard, but it's necessary. If not anything else than a little GitHub repository containing your stories. Okay. Now, in terms of where I learned this, it's not been like a training class or whatever I can attribute it to. However, I have been involved with SANS for a very long time, and I've had mentorship from within SANS where I've had senior instructors, principals, or faculty that I've looked up to, and I've listened in and wanted to perform in a way that makes people feel motivated, encouraged, and enthusiastic about cybersecurity. Because it can be pretty dry if you frame it the wrong way, If you frame it the right way, it can actually be a very motivating thing for a lot of people. And seeing how this industry is booming, at least it seems to be booming, that might impact some people to basically turn the key and turn this into a lifelong career for somebody.
Yeah. All it takes is just a little bit of practice, a lot of consistency, and then I think everything can change for you. I mean, it sounds like you've become a master storyteller by just practicing your craft and making sure that you improve on it day after day.
Sure, absolutely. And of course, having systems to write things down, having like perhaps a diary of what you accomplish and what you do, having a sense of like ideas that you're geared towards instead of wishy-washy between so much stuff, perhaps have some ideas and ambitions where you're heading is of course good ideas too. And also, I must say that once you tell a story multiple times, it tends to stick. And some of the stories that I got wrong, like hacking journalists and so on, I've told them so many times, I almost start to believe, did I really do that? I, I start to question myself. Did you really hack that journalist? And then a second and a third, I did. I got the screenshots to prove it.
So, Chris, I got one last question for you that I think that could help me. So I'm asking out of selfish reasons, but I think might also help security practitioners and the world at large. What is the one thing that I could invest in when it comes to security controls that's going to be one step better at keeping you out?
So I got to quote this famous age-old army general Sun Tzu. If you know yourself, and you know your enemy, you shouldn't have to fear the results of 100 battles, okay? And it's a little bit cliche, or we've used that phrase a lot, but it's actually true. If you know what the opposition, the enemy can do to you, if you know their capabilities, if you know hacking, all right? And if you know what you need to protect, you have a much better chance to withstand the enemy and win the battles. So if it comes down to it, if I had to select something, I would of course select as an inventory. Basically, know what you need to protect, and then if you ask yourselves, Then you need to ask yourselves, do I really need to protect this? Can I perhaps move it away from the internet edge, put it behind some zero trust, identify the users, identify the clients, their workstation before you provide them access, and you can start to minimize your footprint online. And instead of investing in expensive security products, just not even show your systems, just keep them hidden. That's a good security control.
Well said and sound advice. Chris, I wanted to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for jumping on the podcast, sharing everything that you know. If you haven't done so already, you gotta check out Chris Dale. His information is in the show notes or description wherever you're listening or watching. And also be sure if you need some security help that you reach out to Chris and his company, River Security. Chris, thank you again.
It's been a pleasure, my friend.
During the conversation with Chris, I asked him about continuous vigilance, and I wanted to give you my take of what continuous vigilance means. Continuous vigilance means your head is on a swivel. One of my closest friends, Chris Cochran, whenever we go to these game nights where it's like the virtual reality games, he always says, keep your head on a swivel. And I think that's what continuous vigilance is. It's not over-indexing in just one area or one domain because it's what Gartner tells us that we should focus on, or it's because everybody's doing presentations on it. I've seen this over and over again, and I've been a victim of it myself where I forget about continuous vigilance. And here's an example. When I was working at Intel Corporation, I was a cyber fusion analyst, basically a glorified way of saying someone that's supposed to know how to do a lot. It's essentially a security architect. They brought me in to be a security architect, and I learned about this space called SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. I thought SOAR was going to solve all of my problems. As a security architect, I thought it could also solve the problems of some of the team members that, were expressing frustration about being able to take data from point A and transform it so it's compatible with data source B so they could ultimately close out their incidents. Well, here is something that I did. I went and invested all of my attention, all of my energy into SOAR just to find out that there's no such thing as a one size fits all. But there is such thing as, less glasses of pane. People say, I don't want a single pane of glass, but I think we kind of do. But we also want less glasses of pane. So what can we do to make sure that we're not over-indexing? We could do some of the things that Chris was mentioning, focusing on our asset inventory. Technology companies and companies as a whole, we're always going to grow in our people and our capabilities. That means our asset inventory is always going to grow and evolve. That is going to be such a data source of rich insights, so much so that I wrote a book titled Attack Surface Management to talk about how asset inventory is one of those first critical pieces that you must do, that you must abide by before you get to actually practice attack surface management. You have to first understand all of those assets that are under your control. When you do that, you're going to start to realize that the capabilities of your company go well beyond probably what you expected and what you assumed that they would. When you understand this, you also start to realize that there's areas that your company, your team should be scaling in ways that they're not. When you have a strong insight of who you are, your fundamentals of like asset inventory, then you get to say, here's in the areas that I'm spending incorrectly. There's going to be times where we see that there's a device that shouldn't have been there and it shouldn't have been there for quite a bit. And it might look bad on us that it was there in the first place, but that is okay in some cases, as long as we remove it before someone else finds access to it. Like Chris was mentioning on our episode, that it only takes one time. And for him, he wasn't even able to show his full set of strengths and capabilities because the front door was wide open, from phishing emails that people were clicking on the links from to just front desk not necessarily paying attention and keeping their head on a swivel, practicing that notion of continuous vigilance. There's been so many times where I've been at a family dinner and someone asked me, Ron, can you break into Facebook? Like, is that part of your capabilities? And I respond with yes. I just say yes because I can. I might not be breaking into Facebook's servers, but I'm breaking into the way that you practice security, because a lot of the ways that we practice security in our personal lives is suspect, and there's always that opening, there's always that gap. When someone is asking us, can we break into their system? They're not asking us, can you actually break in? They're asking us how good we are. The only way for the world to experience how good you are, or I am, or really any of us, is to first make sure that we have the world covered on the fundamentals. If there's anything that you could take away from this episode, it's to do asset inventory, to walk in tomorrow better than you walked in today and be ready for any battle that may come your way. With that, I would love and invite everyone to like and subscribe to the Hacker Valley Studio podcast, and also to share this episode with someone that you think would enjoy it. And with that, we will see everyone next time.